Dear colleagues, let me present to you a study on the topic, the level of cyberloafing behavior in school children and students. The intensive development of digital technologies, their special role in the life of a modern person and the widespread introduction into the training system explain the growing interest in assessing the benefits and risks of their application in education. Researchers from different countries conclude that digital technologies have contributed to significant changes in the habitat and development of children. Digital games are increasingly being incorporated into classroom learning across the globe. For example, in 2019, 47% of U.S. 3rd through 8th grade teachers reported using digital games in their classrooms several times a week. Research elsewhere in the world shows the use of digital tools in learning as tools to transfer or strengthen academic skills too. The use of digital educational resources is now possible on a wide variety of media, including tablets, mobile phones, game consoles, portable game controllers or computers. Many of them have access to the internet. Such innovations lead to the emergence of new forms of behavior in lessons, require a revision of the norms of correct childhood declared by psychology and the development of new methods for monitoring the behavior of children in the digital environment. However, the solution of such global problems needs a preliminary empirical study of the problem of media consumption of children. Of particular importance are these studies in the context of the behavior of children in the classroom. Several reasons explain the need to study the features of the use of digital technologies by children. This is necessary for doctors to develop recommendations, teachers to decide on the possibility of using such devices in educational institutions, psychologists to optimize the development of the psyche and personality of children, developers of children's educational applications to improve them. The request from a society stimulates researchers around the world. They analyze changes in children's use of gadgets, risks to children's health and learning associated with the use of digital technologies, factors affecting the duration of digital use, screen time, in the mobile internet era, teacher readiness for digital learning transformation. Scientists point out that the modern generation of school children is focused on the use of information technology everywhere, including in the classroom. Such behavior has recently come under scrutiny. Researchers weigh the positive and negative results of digitalization of education. They note a significant gap in the number of studies devoted to the study of the cognitive consequences of using digital technologies in lessons, in a counterbalance more massive body of research on the possibility of digital technologies in education and the negative impact of gadgets on the emotional sphere of children. The results of the study showed that the use of digital interactive technologies in the lesson leads to an improvement, student motivation, metacognition, instrumental functions. However, there are also negative effects of using digital devices in the classroom during the lesson. For example, this reduces the ability to reproduce previously material. Data on effects that are found in relation to academic performance are mixed. Dominance in the entertainment content network distracts school children from solving educational problems. They are starting to use digital devices for entertainment, shopping, communication with peers. This phenomenon is called cyberloafing. Teachers admit that it is naive to expect school children to use digital devices exclusively for educational purposes during a lesson. Scientists note that cyberloafing is a problem that is only intensifying due to the pandemic and the need to switch to a remote work format. Obviously, watching videos, listening to music, online communication on social networks, playing games, and sending messages during the lesson impede the effective process of teaching and raising children. An analysis of the literature on this topic showed that research on cyberloafing in the educational environment is largely carried out in Western countries, but they are still small in Russia. Therefore, the purpose of this study was to study the prevalence of cyberloafing among school children and students in Russia. The survey of school children and students acted as a method of collecting data to identify the level of prevalence of cyberloafing among students of different levels of education. 233 respondents took part in the survey. Of these, 146 school children, grades 7 to 9, and 87, Students, 1 to 3 years of study. The age of respondents is from 13 to 20 years old. Participation in the study was voluntary. Among those surveyed, 58% of respondents were female and 42% were male. The cyberloafing scale proposed by Y. Akbulut and co-authors in the adaptation of N. V. Sivrikova was used to collect empirical data. Each item of the questionnaire assumed a measurement on a 5-point Likert scale of the frequency of various types of cyberloafing behavior, where 1 never, 2 rarely, 3 sometimes, 4 often, 5 constantly. The methodology is based on a 5-factor cyberloafing model. It allows you to assess the frequency of online shopping, 6 points, accessing online content, 7 points, games, 3 points, sharing, 9 points, and communication on social networks, 5 points. As part of the study, respondents were previously asked whether they use the internet during training sessions to solve non-learning problems. Those who answered the question negatively were excluded from the further study. Their number was 1.7%. The analysis of the data assumed an assessment of the distribution parameters of the studied features in the sample. Empirical distribution parameters are not significantly different from normal distribution parameters. However, according to the Levine test, the application of parametric criteria to the resulting array of empirical data will be incorrect. Therefore, the Mann-Whitney U test was used to compare the level of cyberloafing in school children and students. Calculations were performed using statistical software package version 23.0. Figure 1 presents the results of the analysis of mean values by sample, which reflect the severity of individual cyberloafing factors in the study participants. The results of the study showed that students and school children use the internet during study sessions for non-educational purposes rarely or sometimes. According to the data obtained, most often during lessons, study participants use the internet to search for information. Least of all, during training sessions, they play digital games. These features are characteristic of both school children and students. Analysis of the differences between the compared groups showed that the frequency of use of such forms of cyberloafing as sharing, online shopping, and use of social networks is associated with the stage of training. In particular, students more often than school children make online purchases during study sessions. This may be due to their greater material independence. They are more likely to shop than school children, since some of them live separately from their parents. School children are more likely than students during study sessions to communicate on social networks and share information online. This pattern may be related to the difference in age tasks and leading activities among school children and students. The leading activity of the former is communication with peers, which since the pandemic has become more dependent on digital means of communication. An important task of adolescence is self-expression and self-assertion through the expression of one's opinion. This is probably why teenagers are more dependent on various forms of sharing and ratings on social networks, likes, comments, etc. Table contains data on differences in cyberloafing behavior due to the gender of respondents. The study found that boys are more likely than girls to play digital games during training sessions. Girls are more likely than boys to use social media during training sessions. Comparison of the data obtained with the results of other studies made it possible to conclude that among Russian school children and students, the phenomenon of cyberloafing is less common than among school children in other countries. This can be explained by the policy of banning the use of gadgets in a Russian school. This practice indicates that cyberloafing is seen as a barrier to the successful integration of information and communication technologies into the educational environment. In the presented study, the level of cyberloafing in school children indicates that they use access to the internet during lessons to solve problems that are non-learning tasks, rarely or sometimes. Similar data on the prevalence of cyberloafing were found in samples of students from Turkey and Turkish students in grades 6 to 8. On the other hand, students in the United States and Indonesia demonstrate cyberloafing sometimes and often. A comparison of the level of various forms of cyberloafing behavior showed that school children more often use access to online content and solve the problems of socialization, self-expression and maintaining significant relationships, and students also make purchases during training. According to other researchers, students communicate more oftentimes during classes via the internet. Such differences may be related to cultural characteristics. There are conflicting data on sex-related differences in cyberloafing studies. Some studies have found differences in the level of cyberloafing in people of different genders. Sex has also been found to mediate attitudes, behaviors and target behaviors. Other studies report that there is no link between gender and cyberloafing. At the same time, proven differences in media consumption of representatives of different genders make it possible to assert that they will manifest themselves in cyberloafing. Therefore, it can be assumed that the reason for the inability to detect differences is related to the features of the study sample or to the features of the applied data analysis strategies. The results of the study showed that men exhibit cyberloafing behavior, more often than women, in both workplaces and educational institutions. Researchers attribute this to gender differences in Internet use. For example, the number of male Internet users exceeds the number of female users in Turkey. In Russia, the distribution of Internet users is also shifted towards men, 53.5% versus 46.5%, compared to the natural distribution of the population. It is expected that men will endure the habit of using the Internet at the place of work or study. However, gender differences in Internet and cyberspace use may also be controversial. For example, gender differences may depend on the type of cyberloafing behavior. This was confirmed by the results of the current study. Gender differences in the level of individual types of cyberloafing can be influenced by the nature of the target audience, as well as the inclusion of control variables, for example, social desirability. In fact, an analysis of gender differences by individual cyberloafing factors showed that men have higher scores on scales, purchases, access to online content and games. Our study found that girls visit social media, boys play, more oftentimes during lessons. These differences can be explained by the fact that psychological characteristics associated with gender determine the overall activity of a person, including information. The study contributes to the research of new forms of deviant Internet behavior, cyberloafing. Its value is increasing due to the active introduction of remote formats and information and communication technologies into the educational process. The results obtained make it possible to conclude that in Russia the phenomenon of cyberloafing is less common than in other countries. But this form of behavior is already observed in school and higher education institutions. An analysis of the experience of other countries suggests that further monitoring of the level of cyberloafing in Russian educational institutions is necessary. It is necessary to further study this phenomenon and develop measures to prevent its negative effects too. The presented study has some limitations. The study used self-reports as a data collection tool. They are subject to a social desirability factor. Another limitation is the scale used does not take into account a type of cyberloafing as online or offline games during lessons. Despite the limitations described above, the presented study is the first conducted in Russia. Its results are of interest for organizing and further studying cyberloafing in our country.